Okay, maybe we can get started and then let others join as we go. Hi, everyone. Welcome again to yet another session of the seminar series of Trustworthy Machine Learning Initiative. Today, we actually have a very exciting topic. So this is something that is one of our, I think, initial kinds of seminars of this type. So today, we are going to discuss about tenure track careers, and particularly those that sort of involve doing research, teaching, and other aspects in Trustworthy ML. We have a very amazing panel with us today. We have 5 amazing folks who are on tenure track and who are doing great work. And we, will get to them, know more about their work and their research, how they sort of plan their career and so on in a bit. But just first, some logistics at a high level. The plan for today is that from now until 1 p.m. ET, we'll have a panel discussion where the plan is to ask our panelists a bunch of questions that we have received from some of our previous polls, as well as some of my own questions. And then the Q&A here is open. So we really encourage the audience to sort of engage, ask a lot of questions, and we'll also pick your questions and ask them to our panelists. So let's try and keep this as interactive as possible. One thing I want to point about logistics is that if this recording, or rather this seminar, is being recorded and live streamed on YouTube. So if you don't want to appear in the recording, please exit Zoom and watch it on YouTube live stream. But feel free to join us again at 1 p.m. So as is typical of our seminar series discussions, at 1 p.m., we sort of bring everybody back, and the participants will have a chat or a commenting, session about what they heard during the past hour and what their thoughts are. Some of our panelists may stay. I'm going to stay. Some of the Trustworthy ML team is going to stay, but it is then going to become the participants' floor, and you get to talk about what happened in the past hour, right? Okay. And by joining this event, you agree to abide by the code of conduct. So please post your questions, in a very polite manner. Please don't sort of use any kind of harsh language. Please, abide by the code of conduct that is typical of all machine learning conferences. Okay. Before we get into the details of today's seminar, just at a high level, we just wanted to reintroduce ourselves. So we are the Trustworthy ML Initiative. It's a bunch of several of us who are interested in this area and wanted to bring together a community of people that work in this area. More specifically, we have a bunch of goals that we have been working towards. One is easy access to fundamental resources in this field. To this end, we have a curated list of tutorials, courses, papers on our webpage. And we also wanted to provide a platform for early career researchers. As part of this, we do Twitter highlights and Rising Star Spotlight talks of junior researchers. And we also wanted to promote discussion and debate both through our seminar series discussions like these, as well as active Twitter debates. And we also wanted to, most importantly, build a community of researchers and practitioners through symposiums, workshops, and this kind of a seminar series. Right. So with that said, thank you so much for joining us again. So today, as you know, I was mentioning at the beginning of my comments, we have a very exciting and illustrious panel, and we are going to discuss about research opportunities, challenges, and work-life balance in tenure track careers. So it's a pretty loaded and heavy topic. So we are going to try and cover several nuances of each of these aspects of tenure track careers. But first, I'll go to each of the panelists and would love to ask them to introduce themselves. What is their research area? What do they work on? And what are their current positions? So maybe I will go in the order in which I see on my Zoom screen. Maria, do you want to kick us off?
Thank you, Hima, for organizing this and for the invitation. I'm very excited to be here today. So as an introduction, I'm Maria De-Arteaga. I'm an assistant professor in the Information Risk and Operations Management Department that is part of the Macomb School of Business at UT Austin. And in addition to this, I am a core faculty member of the Machine Learning Laboratory that is an interdepartmental initiative, and a researcher of the Good Systems Initiative, which is also an initiative at UT. And what my research focuses on, broadly speaking, is what are the risks and the opportunities when we think about using machine learning for decision support, especially in high-stakes contexts. And so part of this has been focused on algorithmic fairness. There, some of my work characterizes the risks of bias. Some of it tries to mitigate those risks through machine learning research. And the other avenue of my work looks at human-AI collaboration. And there, part of it is trying to understand how humans make use of algorithms. And then based on that understanding, how should we be designing machine learning algorithms that are better suited for collaboration?
Right. Maria, do you want to pass it to someone?
Yeah, sure. Next on my screen is Kai-Wei.
Okay, hi, hello everyone, and thanks for the invitation to this panel. So I'm Kai-Wei Chang, so I'm assistant professor at the UCLA and will be tenure this summer. Yeah, and I also hold a part-time job at Amazon as an Amazon visiting scholar. Yeah, so kind of had a combination of academic and the industrial experience. Yeah, so my main research is on the reliable natural language processing. So that include how to make the language model more inclusive and also more robust and also more fair. Yeah, and also part of that is we want to improve the generalization ability of those models so they can transfer to work on the low resource language and also to some domain that has some social good applications.
Thanks, Kai-Wei. Okay, next, maybe I'll call on Olga.
Sure, sounds great. So hello, everybody. I'll first and foremost say, I mean, I'm just such a huge fan of this initiative, like the TrustworthyML initiative. I was so excited when it sort of came up, and I've been, following the seminars as best as I can or watching the recordings. And I just want to give a huge shout out to the organizers. Like, thank you so much for, getting this started a couple of years ago and kind of keeping this going. Right. So I'm Olga. I'm an assistant professor in computer science at Princeton. I work in the area of computer vision, but beyond that, actually, the pitch that I was going to give for my work is remarkably similar to what Maria already sort of highlighted. So it's very similar to sort of her mission as well of kind of thinking about computer vision, but from the perspective of kind of the biggest challenge in the development of computer vision systems right now being some of the sort of ethical concerns that are arising out of this technology or preventing it from sort of being deployed safely and well in the real world. And so we look at fairness and sort of interventions on to try to mitigate bias and reveal bias in computer vision systems. We look at transparency, so trying to do better kind of evaluation of these systems, as well as sort of provide some interpretability methods to better understand the decision making, and kind of think about enabling better collaborations with humans so that humans are able to actually give feedback to these systems.
Great. Thanks, Olga. So I think just in the interest of time, I'm going to keep this moving. Next is Gautam.
Yeah, thanks, Hima, for having me. And again, I'll keep it short, but thanks so much for running TrustworthyML, the initiative, you and all the other organizers. My name is Gautam Kamath. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Waterloo in Canada. I'm a member of the School of Computer Science since summer of 2019. So I've been here for almost 3 years now, which is scary to say. Yeah, my research is in, just like everyone, trustworthy ML. And two of the subfields within this sort of wide umbrella that I focus on are privacy and robustness. Currently, I'm a little bit more in the privacy direction, but I'm still looking for more good questions in robustness. So maybe that'll take the lead in a few years.
Awesome. Thanks, Gautam. Marinka?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for including me. I really like Trustworthy ML initiative as well, and I'm lucky to be at Harvard and kind of can ping Hima as often as I want with regard to the initiative. So my name is Marinka Zitnik. I'm assistant professor of biomedical informatics at Harvard with appointments in the medical school and also appointments at the Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard Data Science Initiative. And our research is primarily focused on identifying what problems in scientific discovery, particularly in biology and medicine, are at the cusp of benefiting from ML, and then how can we develop powerful ML solutions for those problems. And in doing so, some of the more methodological ML work is relied on finding ways that allow us to infuse structure and knowledge into ML models, and particularly that relates to questions around how we can effectively learn with multimodal graph structured data sets. And on the trustworthy end, we are interested in and think quite carefully and deeply about how we can design these AI tools that can produce hypotheses that are actionable. And for that means for me that they lend themselves directly, immediately to downstream experiments that are done in the wet lab, in biological research lab, or in a clinical setting. And that requires that the hypotheses that AI models are deriving are as actionable as possible and also interpretable, since many of the use cases of these models for scientific discovery really require not only accurate predictions, but also ability to extract new mechanisms and insights that can distill into scientific descriptions.
Awesome. Thanks so much, everyone. And it's super exciting to see, some kind of coherent focus, but at the same time, very different lens of looking at it and applying it, right? Like all the way from medical applications to NLP to vision. So yeah, I'm very glad that we are able to bring together this kind of diverse panel. Okay, let's step into some of the more, I guess, the meat of today's planned discussion. Maybe I'll kick off with an easy question. So what made you guys choose Tenure Track Careers, given your research interests, given that, research on trustworthy machine learning is also happening in industry and several other streams, sort of independent nonprofits? What made you choose careers in academia? Feel free to start, anyone who wants to jump in.
So perhaps let me start with some simplest reason for me. It's just because I love to work with students and like to have a research freedom that I can define the research goal by myself, and then trying to influence the students and also the community to work on the problem I like.
Mm-hmm. Okay, got it. Any other different thoughts?
Yeah. Let me chime in and say that, yeah, it's kind of, I guess, ironic because people always say that one of the big benefits of being tenure track is that you have a lot of academic freedom. But this is ironic because of the fact that right now in industry, I think there's a lot of ability to do things which are well aligned with the type of research that I think any or all of us are doing in terms of academic freedom. So at least for the time being, I think, I think people should maybe think a little bit more about that as a reason, at least in the short term. There's also the question about the long term of ML in industry, whether this is here to stay versus, maybe we hit a second AI winter and then all these labs close down. But at least for the time being, I think freedom in industry seems to actually be relatively good.
For me, that was actually a concern, because I think that depending on the topic of research, that may vary a little bit. And I was a little bit worried in the context of fairness in particular, how in industry settings that can reduce the scope both of the questions that you may be able to answer and of the answers that you may be able to reach. And so I think that for me was something that played a role. And soon after I made the decision was when Timnit Gebru's and Margaret Mitchell's kind of situation at Google happened. And so I think that for me is something that in certain domains is not very clear to me. Well, I think that the role of industry in this space is super important, and I'm so glad that they're investing in this. I think that it's not entirely clear in some contexts how to navigate some types of research in trustworthy ML from inside industry. And so that for me personally is something that played a role.
Got it. So you're discussing about like the fairness or bias or ethical issues and the freedom to pursue those and find any answers in some sense.
Exactly. Yeah.
Any other thoughts on why people chose tenure track careers in these spaces?
If I can add one kind of a bit alternative perspective, for me, what was also important was to think about who are users of the tools that we're developing. And so particularly, the tools that we're developing for biological discovery, medical applications, very often users are other institutes, biological labs, clinical labs that are often academic institutions, or if not kind of primary academic institutions, they're affiliated with some university or they are teaching hospitals and so on. And so it was quite natural to think about a tenure track or academically focused career there, because the users of the models that we are developing are like heavily academic users or academically affiliated institutions.
Okay, so
not
the relevance,
them, but many.
Right. Yeah. So you're saying like the relevance of your work is to an academic audience through your career. So it just made logical conclusion to sort of continue down that path.
Exactly. So if like to find, if I have an AI model and how can I find users for that model, I just need to go down the hall and like knock on a bunch of the doors of large biolabs, and they would be eager to try out and consider hypotheses and validate some of them. So in that respect, that's kind of easier than what would be possible if I would try to do that from the industry standpoint.
Got it. So let's go over a little bit of each of the responsibilities that each of you sort of shoulder as part of your job. What are the different pieces that you spend time on? Any estimates on how much time you spend on like what piece, because there's clearly a job that comes with multiple responsibilities. And if we could also kind of see if there are any differences that are popping up in terms of emphasis on different aspects, like versus teaching versus research and so on in like different departments or schools. So yeah, like what are the different aspects of your job? Roughly any estimates on how much time do you spend on each aspect?
I guess to break the tie, I'll kind of go first. I think usually when you take a tenure track job, they generally, the guidance they say almost universally is that your job is supposed to be 40% research, 40% teaching, and 20% service. Now, I think like this is a bit of a lie, and probably most people will agree with this. I think, service is generally, I think, as a tenure track faculty valued a little bit less. Though I think there is, of course, the opportunity to do unlimited amounts of service. For example, like Hima, for example, by being one of the organizers of this amazing initiative, that's like a service that people do. And I similarly like try to do other service initiatives for the community, because having a community is very important to me. I'm not going to try to commit to any specific hours on how much I spend doing stuff, just because yeah, it's I think a bit difficult. In terms of teaching, the terms when I'm teaching, I think that takes up a lot of time, probably like I guess this one I can say a time, maybe like 1 day a week in terms of preparing, and maybe roughly a full day for each lecture. needs to be spent preparing, at least at the beginning. I hear the longer time you go, then it becomes more natural. You've given this lecture for 20 years in a row, so then, you can do it again, no problem. But of course, research is the other remaining big thing, which maybe you try to fill all your working time with research otherwise. One thing that is not mentioned in this 100%, maybe it's the remaining 30%, is just random like administration and random tasks which has come up. For example, like you I don't know, like, okay, for example, I mean, reviewing probably fits under the umbrella of service, but yeah, just random forms you have to sign and just very many emails you have to deal with in a day. I probably get about 10 actionable emails per day that I star and revisit at the end of the day. And then this takes like maybe an hour or two every day just to get through all of these emails that I have to act on. So I think, yeah, in terms of time and annoyingness, there's like, random emails is kind of an under-mentioned part of the job.
Do others have similar functionalities, or are there differences depending on the schools and expectations? Maria, do you want to chime in?
I would say it's very similar. I think one thing where I would say starts getting different is how, for example, the research time is spent. There's certain departments where there's more of a PI role, and I think that's something that varies a little bit across different disciplines. In the business school context, there's a wide range of how you can do it, but I think it's a lot more common for a lot of faculty to continue doing their own research, not necessarily work with that many students. PhD programs are also smaller in business schools, I think as part of both how funding works and also a concern of not oversaturating the market, because business schools, I think, are a little bit more oriented towards academic placements. And so I think that's something that I find a little bit different. The emphasis on grants is less so in business schools than it is in CS, for example, I think. And then in my case, I do some grants, I do work with students, but there's less of a focus on you become a PI once you become a faculty member. And some people just keep on being first author on their papers and doing most of the hands-on work themselves. So I would say that is one element in which there can be a lot of variation across disciplines and departments. But I'm very curious to hear from others in the panel what their impressions on these are.
Does anyone else want to chime in?
I mean, I don't know if I have an answer to Maria's question, but I will echo though that I think it's very hard to think in terms, like, to sort of give percentages and numbers on time. So actually a few years ago, I realized that sort of the way I think about time management that actually works quite well for me is I think in terms of like energy expenditures rather than number of hours, because there's some things that like energize me. So like, for example, I co-founded the AI for All nonprofit, and I do a lot of work with AI for All and with sort of high school students from different backgrounds who are part of that. And that takes time, but I walk out sort of more energized, basically always, anything I do for AI for All. And similarly, like meetings with my PhD students to like discuss research, like I walk out sort of more energized, whereas, slogging through emails, I usually emerge sort of, even if it only was half an hour, I feel sort of drained and decision fatigued. And so what I very much try to do is sort of automate or develop kind of processes for decision making on anything that sort of I dread doing, and just kind of try to make that as quick as possible. And especially, again, like kind of have processes for decisions there, so I don't have to be thinking about it, and that kind of frees up as I'm sort of walking somewhere to be thinking about research or something that excites me, rather than like trying to figure out some kind of pesky logistic thing that I have to deal with.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure it's kind of interesting to the students who are listening here and on YouTube that email and logistics and forms are coming up quite a bit in pretty much every answer, and also somewhat as least favorite tasks. Okay. Any other thoughts on different roles? What do you spend time on? I also wanted to touch a little bit upon, I think Gautam started off by talking a little bit about how research is 40%, at least, on paper or like as a rough guideline. How much of that do you guys sort of spend, let's say, thinking alone versus like, just mentoring students and sort of helping them do stuff? Or is it a mix, or is it like heavily leaning towards one versus the other? How do you think about like the research piece?
If I can start and perhaps just echo again what Olga said in terms of what I found very useful is to think about ways to automate various tasks in the lab in terms of like designing lab presentation schedule, how to prepare camera ready papers and so on, so that I don't need to then go with each and every student through the same set of questions on how to prepare camera ready for a submission, but there is a document with guidelines for the lab how to do that. And kind of that I adopt this strategy quite a bit for the lab. It allows me to grow the lab more easily, parallelize certain tasks. And it's also about those questions that would kind of just suck the energy out of you, or at least out of me, if I would need to like meet with 5 students on one day, and then with each of them we would talk exactly about the same thing, which is how to format the paper for camera ready submission. It's like the first time you did that as a very junior faculty, you realize that, okay, perhaps I could do this in a different way. Related to Hima, what you asked, to me, what I experienced is that in the first year when I started, and so I would still consider myself very junior faculty, just finishing up my second year. But in the first year, I found it that it's important for me to do lots of thinking alone, and then kind of guiding PhD students that were new PhD students. There was the lab was much smaller. There was no kind of this lab knowledge where essentially the student could ask another student, a more senior PhD student or a more senior postdoc, about how to do certain things. So essentially that meant that in the span of 5 minutes, I got a question about what is this function in PyTorch geometric? What does it do? And I also got the question about how should I think about the broader impact statement for my fellowship application, right? It's kind of just the granularity of questions is then very different. And now I'm feeling that after a year or so, that has already changed, because now it's essentially this knowledge that is growing in the lab that allows me to also direct students to interact more closely, ask questions to more senior students or postdocs. That is taking some of the burden off my plate so that we can have more exciting discussions or more profound research discussions with students rather than debugging some model together or something to that effect.
Yeah, so yeah, that definitely, I think a lot of newer faculty can sort of relate to the granularity of questions being all over the place in the beginning, and then slowly that, settling into a certain pipeline. Any other thoughts on how much time do you guys kind of spend, like mentoring versus like thinking alone and doing your own research? I guess since Marinka is a little bit more on the earlier side of the spectrum, maybe I'll throw this to Kai-Wei and see how he thinks about it, since I think he has crossed the finish line and it's just like waiting to become formal.
Yeah, so I echo what everyone's saying. So basically, trying to make the lab automated is very important. And we also do something called paper clinic. So kind of 1 week before the paper submission, we have a peer review, and people will help each other to to review their paper and give some comments. I think this is actually very useful. Yeah, and in terms of the time, I think it changed a little bit from I start at the beginning to now. Yeah, so at the beginning, I think most of the time are spending on helping the student to debug, to trying to start the first project, and then in the middle, I think most of the time begin to spending on trying to write a proposal, discuss what is the next step of research direction, those kind of things. And now I have some students just graduate, so then I spend a lot of time discussing with them how their graduation plan. And some of these senior students now can help the junior ones, so then the pipeline is there. Yeah, and also for the general, I think the people tell you that as a faculty you have a freedom to decide what to do, so your time is very flexible. it's partially like because you have a lot of things to do, so it's really not like very flexible in some way, but you can definitely decide that which part you want to spend more time on. And then I think everyone has a different decision in how to manage the time.
Right. So I think Kai-Wei is hinting at long hours, but you can decide when you get to spend those long hours in some sense. Okay.
Yeah.
So, all right. Okay. So I'll probably just throw this to Gautam a little bit, because I know that a lot of ML and, even Marinka talked about like how the bioinformatics side function. A lot of this has like a very, PI and like a bunch of students kind of model, and growing that and creating that pipeline is one key piece of it. Whereas I understand that theory, Gautam is, more of a theoretical researcher. What differences do you see, Gautam, in terms of how you think of research compared to like a typical applied ML or, sort of medical school kind of pipelines?
Right. Yeah, thanks, Hima. I guess by training, I'm kind of a theoretical computer scientist, where the norm in that field is maybe to have maybe 3, 4 students. 5 students would be a lot, actually, compared to machine learning, where it's more common to, I've seen people with, upwards of 15, 20 students sometimes. So I think it's sometimes a very different style of advising, in the sense that for my theory students, I think we do a lot more problem solving and like actually working out a lot of the math together, because like I think it's very hard to I think you need more guidance to get started in theory compared to the ramp up time for machine learning, where you can just sort of start running code and see what happens. So yeah, I think it's definitely a very different style of advising in my side, which requires, I think, more hands-on for theoretical based students. And I think a lot of PIs kind of make this decision which one they want to do when they're still a little bit more on the theory side, in the sense that they kind of decide whether they want to sort of focus on a theory style of advising versus a machine learning style of advising. I'm trying to, be somewhere in the middle with both styles of students.
So I think Olga probably already helped us kick off this question a little bit when she talked about what energizes her among the different things that she does as part of her job, right? So let me ask this question. So what is the most challenging thing, and what is like the most easiest or your most favorite thing to do as part of your job? Or I guess these are two independent questions, because maybe, sometimes challenging things can also be favorite things. So the two questions are, what is your most favorite thing? And also, what is the most challenging thing? So two independent questions.
So I guess I'll start. So I think, the favorite thing without a doubt is working with students and brainstorming and I mean to sort of answer the question also earlier about kind of independent research versus research with students. I've always been more of a collaborative researcher. Like I love working with students. I love working with my colleagues and sort of starting these collaborations and being in these sort of brainstorming meetings where we get great ideas. That's definitely the favorite. That's easy, and watching the students grow and learn from those. I think the most challenging, so I suspect this will vary from person to person, because to some extent, like being a professor is like, 50 jobs in one. And so it kind of hits on like whatever weakness you do have, like it's gonna hit on that, like you're gonna have to grapple with that. So for me, I think so I already kind of mentioned decision fatigue, but I think there's a lot of like small things you sort of have to decide, like you want to hire an undergrad research assistant, over the summer you already identified them, but now you have to do like a job posting, and so the job posting you have to sort of fill out this form with all of the different like job descriptions or whatever, or like you're writing a grant proposal, you have to fill out, again, answer 50,000 questions sort of, and then each one kind of has the potential to take you down the rabbit hole of like really trying to think about what all of those details are. And so I think to me that like trying not to get bogged down in those and just make those decisions quickly and sort of move on is I think the hardest piece. Is just there's a lot of like very small decisions.
Do others think similarly, or are there different aspects that you find challenging or that you find are your favorite?
For me, the favorite is very similar, both with students and with peers. I think one of the things I find similar to Olga, one of the things that I'm very much a collaborative researcher. I enjoy that a lot more than working on my own. And the fact that you get to work with your favorite people is just an amazing part of the work. And you meet someone who's doing stuff that is interesting and you have an interesting conversation, and then a collaboration can be born from that. And so that is my favorite part. At a meta level, I think one of the things that I find challenging, especially speaking to the topic of the workshop today, that a lot of our work is interdisciplinary, I think. And there's a lot of challenges to doing interdisciplinary work in academia, because the structure of academia in many ways is very siloed. And so that is particularly true to what are the things that are valued in different contexts. And it is really so striking how people who are very close together in terms of the topics of the research spaces they inhabit, it may still be entirely different what are the things that they value, both in terms of, do they care about conferences or do they care about journals? Do they care about different types of contributions? And I think that when you have a presence in multiple communities, finding ways of navigating the sometimes conflicting, sometimes just entirely orthogonal expectations is something that I think can be hard along many lines, both from the strategic perspective of deciding how you're investing your time, what are you prioritizing, and also just from like a personal perspective of, it's very easy to feel like you're being pulled in a gazillion directions at once. And so that is something that I find to be particularly challenging when doing research that is interdisciplinary and spans different communities.
Right. Yeah. And I think, Maria, you also hit on a very interesting point where you said it's probably just the gazillion things that you're pulled into, because we have had some like fire chat, series earlier and so on. And there also, when we asked people, okay, so what is the most challenging aspect of your job? The answers were like precisely what you said, right? It's not one piece of it, but like it's handling all of this together, because there are like gazillion things that are sort of being thrown at you and you have to respond to them appropriately. And sometimes it can feel like firefighting. I don't know if people can sort of relate to that, or yeah, I see a lot of head nods. Okay. All right. So any other thoughts on challenging aspects versus favorite aspects that we probably haven't covered or touched upon, or others have similar thoughts?
Just touching on the, like, I guess firefighting and like, I think in general, tenure track in academia is very biased in favor of people who have a hard time saying no to things. I'm sure everyone here has a hard time saying no to things. I mean, you're all here, right? You said yes to this, for example. You didn't have to spend an hour on your Thursday, even though this is a great initiative. I think one thing that academics are very bad at is saying no. And there's, to be honest, I don't think, this is something I think people need to work on. But I think maybe as people get older or more senior, get tenure, then I hope people realize that they can say no to more things. And maybe one day I'll become a grouchy old professor who has maybe like one student, and any other email I'll just ignore. But that's kind of how maybe you get out of that firefighting mode.
All right. So I think there are also some aspects that I think some of you have touched upon, and Maria has brought this up, like, a lot of trustworthy machine learning research sometimes can get into interdisciplinary zones. And in that sense, we always have to worry about, will my community care about this? Or like, do I have enough incentive to do this kind of work? So I think that is, she already pointed, like one of the pieces that can potentially be improved in order to make the lives of people on tenure track, I guess, somewhat easier. But if I were to ask you, are there some set of things, one or two things that you can see where you think, oh, if this can be improved, my life on tenure track would be much simpler? What would those kinds of things be? can see that people are weighing their thoughts quite a bit in terms of what to say and not to, but yeah.
I mean, I have an answer to that. I mean, I think it's just administrative support. I think administrative support in academia is, I mean, it's both of the financial reasons, but also I think it's viewed as, you know, supplementary / you know, we should be able to handle, you know, most of our jobs on our own. But in practice, I think like normalizing large amount that like this job just involves such a huge administrative component, and some of this can absolutely be outsourced to folks. This does not need to all be done by professors. So that's you know, the biggest thing, but that 100% would be, you know, it's connected to financial, you know, capacity of academia.
Right. Yeah. So essentially, whatever can be done in order to give you more time to focus on research, right? Other administrative stuff like emails, appointments, all of that to be taken care of. And Olga, you also mentioned a little bit about the financial aspects. Like, do you think there is anything about the setup that we currently have where we spend time on writing grants, you know, for NSF, NIH, industry? Do you think like some pieces of that can also be streamlined? I guess there are some parts that we do have support for, right? Like, you know, we have research administrative support in terms of boilerplates and templates, but like, is there something more that can be done there as well?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I mean, so to be honest, this is one of those questions that I would love to, you know, sort of post tenure, like really think much more deeply about. I don't know if I have a great answer now in terms of kind of how to change those systems. I really haven't given it much thought, but for sure, I'm sure things could be done there. Now, I'll say sort of on the administrative side. I mean, one thing to realize about interdisciplinary work, right? The amount of administrative overhead for interdisciplinary work is so much high. I mean, it's orders of magnitude higher compared to like if you were to do a standard kind of tried and true thing, like anything sort of out of the box you try to do, you end up having to, you know, carve the path for that yourself. So I will say the burdens here are disproportionately on interdisciplinary researchers.
Yeah, so in some sense, both incentives for interdisciplinary research, or rather alignment of incentives between potentially adjacent research communities for interdisciplinary research, as well as like any kind of administrative support that can take away as much of logistical aspects as possible, which will allow you to focus on research and mentoring. Those are the things that you guys would focus on. Okay, awesome. All right, so let me ask this question. I think this has been kind of popping up in different ways as we have this chat. What kind of pressures do you feel as part of your job, and particularly being a part of communities like machine learning, where there is this kind of emphasis on high volume of publishing? So in such a system, what kinds of pressures do you feel, particularly being on tenure track alongside being in a system like this?
So maybe let me kick off this question. So I think the most pressure thing for me is the grant writing. So if you happen to think about the acceptance rate for the paper is low, usually the grant acceptance rate is even more lower. Yeah, so like NSF and also other funding opportunities, usually they have a acceptance rate like 5 to 10%. So it's almost that you spend a lot of time to work on the proposal, and then most of the time the proposal will be declined, which is fine, because I think most of the time when you write a proposal also you can think about your research, so it's not really a waste of time. But when you see a lot of rejection, that's still sometimes very bad. Yeah, so also back to the question that Hima was asking, I think if there is a way that we can maybe build a community and then to trying to to attract more funding opportunity, I think that would be a great help.
And funding is one of the, I would say, Kai-Wei, you are saying that could be like one of the pressures that we face to sort of keep up with that, given that grants are also pretty selective. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what other pressures do you guys think we typically face on tenure tracks?
I feel like the rapid clip of research is really something that I find very disappointing, in the sense that I think it really lowers the quality of research. I mean, yeah, I think, you know, there's some papers of my own which I regret. I didn't really even need to write this paper. This wasn't really necessary. And I think there's many papers I see in, say, conferences like New York TrustworthyML where I really wonder, like, did this need to be done? But I think that's kind of part of the culture where we really say you need to publish as fast as possible. You need to publish as much as possible. You know, if you get published, that's a 1. If not, that's a 0. People don't have time to read other people's papers. And so, like, okay, they have 12 papers. That's a good, better than 8 papers. Whereas, I just think this is all around toxic and very, like, disastrous culture. And, you know, I wish, you know, I don't see how to change this, but I wish we went quite kind of back to the days where people would try to put out good work rather than a lot of work.
Yeah.
If I can add to that, that's a great point. And as somebody who works at the interface of ML and bio, the different style in publishing there is a tremendous gap in the way people think about publishing. Because on the one hand, students are optimizing for the number of their conference papers in their top handful of conferences that they consider the best, or the conferences in their specific field. On the other hand, in kind of biological medical discovery, it's often more about putting work from multiple years into one large journal publication that can also then take several years to publish. And so the amount CVs, also the amount of work that goes into publication, the cycle, whether it takes a year or whether it takes 3 years to publish a paper, right? And so it's sometimes challenging to essentially somebody who works in interdisciplinary field to work on these different modes. So to essentially catch all the conference deadlines, and we know what are those busy months that we have every year, but at the same time, you're like also working on journal publications for some of the venues that are very different in their way the papers are written, papers are structured, discoveries are made, and kind of how to balance between these two different tracks can be sometimes challenging.
Right. And I think the cadence of publishing in ML is something that often gets discussed, as Gautam was also highlighting some of the challenges that come with it, right? I wonder though, like, I mean, do you guys think there is something that, you know, let's say people in like our positions on tenure track can do about it, or we are just kind of part of a system that we just have to live with and go with it? Like, what are your thoughts on how you approach this kind of a situation? I mean, I guess idealistically or like ideologically, you might have like a different stance on this, right? As Gautam pointed out, I wish we go back to these previous times where we would take our time and write one paper and like with a lot of thought and so on. But while that's what we sort of maintain ideologically, how much can we stay away from this pressure of like just following a pattern that the community has set for you?
I can go on this one. I think there's 2 elements where I've thought about these a lot that are different but related. One is in terms of the amount of work. And that gets to something, Hima, that you had, that I think you wanted to touch on in terms of work-life balance. And so I think that for me, it's just there's clear boundaries that I've set in which I'm just not willing to sacrifice my health. I'm not willing to sacrifice time with my loved ones, and that's it. And so whether that works or not, it's just certain boundaries that I have set. And I think that something similar, so much similar, goes towards when you're shifting the kind of like what you consider to be good work versus what external incentives are leading you towards. And that can be in terms of the questions that you tackle. It may be in terms of where you're having a presence. And so I think that there's obviously this kind of constant negotiation and balance that we're trying to find. One thing that I've really kind of come to realized that I think is important is that we often think about things as, well, if I choose to adhere to external incentives, then I'll succeed. Mm-hmm. And that's not always true. There's multiple paths to failure. Mm-hmm. And so I think that there's also this stance that is like, I mean, I also want to, if I fail, be happy with what I chose to do. And so I think that that is somewhere where that balance for me is important. That is, I want to still be doing something that I find worthwhile. And I don't think that looks like, oh, you just ignore external incentives and you're just driven by an internal compass. But I do think that finding that balance there is important, because I think that there's also this fallacy of, if you adhere to external incentives, you'll do better. And I don't think that's always the case, in part because that's also just kind of directly optimizing for a measurable proxy that is not kind of the latent construct that we care about, if we want to relate it back to the way that we think about things in optimization.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. So you're saying some kind of balance you try to strike by putting some boundaries, so that, and I'm understanding that you're also saying this can be dynamic and it will evolve or change, and you're constantly sort of negotiating it with yourself in some sense. Yeah. So I think Maria has already, touched upon the topic of work-life balance, which often gets discussed quite a bit in academia at all levels. So what is your take on work-life balance? What do you do explicitly to sort of maintain a work-life balance? How do you think about this?
Let me say here, like, let me confess, I am not good at work-life balance. I think, I am not good at drawing lines for myself. I think one way I do it when I am able to is by kind of making commitments to other people. For example, when I'm living with my partner, I'm not right now, but I have in the past and I will again soon. I'm usually, I after a certain hour, okay, let's do something together in the evening, because I feel like I have a commitment to another person rather than just myself. I think I'm generally kinder to other people than I am to myself. Similarly, when I hang out with my friends on the weekend, I commit to something big. For example, oh yeah, I'll cook some food for us. This takes like several hours, but it's like something, okay, I've committed to it. Now I have to do it because I'm a man of my word. So that's one way, by sort of committing to things to other people, which is kind of goes back to the previous thing I was saying about, like, saying yes to things, forcing yourself to say yes to things to get away. So you can use this addiction to saying yes to maybe get away from working.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, I think somehow, again, this could be some kind of a self-selection bias here, but I think academics typically struggle to maintain work-life balance, not even sometimes due to external reasons, but because of how they are wired as people and how they've sort of adapted to the system in some way, right? I think, I'm sure every one of us, like, we have probably not heard of anyone say, oh, I strike a very good work-life balance and I know I'm doing a great job at it. I think we're all like, well, it's an ongoing work, or like maybe not so good at it. I wonder how others think about it as well.
I mean, I'll
go ahead,
Maria. Go ahead. I mean, I'll just say, I think about it. First of all, I'll confess sort of similarly, definitely not good at work-life balance. I think of it again in terms of sort of energy expenditure. So I think about, like, I've given up on trying to draw any kind of boundaries, because I think, it's hard to deny that, like, my self-identity is connected to sort of being an academic, and the job is, a passion as well as a job. But I think, again, very carefully about, like, avoiding burnout, because I've had, a really bad experience in grad school where I actually had to take a quarter off due to, like, complete burnout. And that's, like, very, it sucks that I had to go through that, but I think to me that very much gave a very strong negative training example of, like, let's not get there. And so I think a lot about, like, how to sort of get myself refreshed and re-energized and not kind of in the context of the job. And so it turns out that, for example, like, going on vacation and not checking email at all is, like super stressful for me. Like, I can't do that, but I can absolutely set an autoresponder and then check, and then not feel compelled to respond to all of the small decisions again that are kind of my biggest Achilles heel. And so I try to very much sort of think about like energy expenditure and like burnout rather than like work-life balance. Go ahead, Maria. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. You wanted to chime in? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, I echo everything that has been said about commitments are super useful, and it can be to other people. It can be signing up for things. If you know that on Tuesdays you have a dancing lesson, and that's just what happens at 7 p.m., you'll be there. And so I think that's super useful. I think that I'll say, I think I'm pretty decent at work-life balance, just in terms of saying, like, I think it is possible. And I don't think it's always the case. I think that there's times in which I'm definitely not being good at it. And so I think that there's definitely, as you were saying, Hima, it's like a work in progress. But I think that there's, like, I don't think that the only, because that was something that I was really, really afraid when considering academia, that I was like, if the only way in which I can do this job is by sacrificing all of these things that are really important to me, then I really don't want to do that job. And I think that that is one of the things that scares so many people away from academia and ends up with a self-selection that is just like, we're just willing to do the job in a certain way. And so I think that there is like, for example, I take most weekends off. And I think that the way that I've come to do that is, one, in terms of kind of clear boundaries of realizing what are priorities for me, that I just really like the people I love, like sleep and things like that. I think that connected to sleep, I think that one of the things that I find very weird in academia is that it's something where we're like, academia is a lot about being a top performer in something. And you don't see athletes being like, oh, I'm just gonna not sleep today so that I train a little bit more. And so I think that there's just like basic things like sleep is just something that scientifically we know our brain needs it in order to function, and we really need our brain in our job. And like eating well, there's all of these elements of being good at our job that really requires us to have all of these other elements there. And as Olga was saying, the danger of burnout is so real. It's also real that like we can get so tired of it that we just abandon it because, well, we stop having joy in our job. So anyways, I think about this a lot, but I'm going to stop talking right now.
No, I think your points on like, this is almost like a competitive sport, but also like an endurance sport, right? I think that is very striking. I think that's probably the right way to think about it, where you're constantly optimizing for your performance, but at the same time, it's not a sprint, like you have a long way to go, right? So in some sense, you'll have to like optimize for that long-term performance as opposed to like, short-term and then you burn out, right? Okay, and our last question, I know that several of the folks are actually on the market, some of them are interviewing, some of them have offers, and they're trying to decide, which positions to take up, which universities, which departments, all of that. So what would be your advice in terms of making a choice in terms of which tenure track job to take up, which university, which department? How would you approach this question?
So I would say two things that matters a lot. So one is the environment of the department. So do people love to collaborate with each other? And a lot of time you can see their publication record of those faculty. If they have a lot of collaboration, then usually that is a good sign. But of course, that depends on your preference. So some people like to collaborate, some people want to work with their own students. So both are fine. But I mean, that's one thing I would take look. And the other is the funding structure. So different university have different way to fund their students. So some university, you don't need to pay the TA if they doing the TA. Yeah, some you need to pay. Yeah, and there are also a different way that to pay the student and also the indirect costs, those kind of things. So that will also matter a lot.
Any other thoughts on what they should look out for when making decisions about job offers?
Great points. When I was actually on the job market, I developed a multidimensional model, and then we essentially talked about what are different dimensions that are more or less important to me, and then essentially develop my own ranks list of schools based on that. But kind of things that I was considering as just dimensions is really what would be a fit between the candidate and the department, more broadly within the school, more broadly within the university. Are things important to you, like whether the university is in an area where there's lots of relevant industry nearby versus not, you don't need that? Do you want to be able to recruit students from a couple of PhD programs or from many different PhD programs? And will you have a chance to get access to students from those programs? Then, of course, things related to funding or administrative support. Some universities offer quite a bit of administrative support, both for writing and submitting grants and administrative tasks. Others do not. And so is that important? Again, it depends on an individual. Kind of those are the kind of questions that I was thinking about when I was making decisions at this stage about where to apply and what offers to consider.
I think one thing I'd add there is also see who has succeeded in the department and who has chosen to stay. And so, for example, if you're applying to a stats department and they say that they want an applied statistician, but all of the applied statisticians they've ever hired haven't gotten tenure, then ask how they're planning to assess success, right? I think that seeing both who has succeeded and seeing whether they have a plan to assess your success is very important. And that comes both to the type of research that you're doing, to things like if all the women that joined the department quit within the first 3 years, then what's going on there? And so paying attention to people who have joined before, what do people who succeed in an environment look like? I think that can tell you a lot about a department.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Any last thoughts, last comments? I will see agreements and nods to what was being said. Okay, so with that, I think maybe we'll wrap it up here. Thank you so much, guys, for joining and for this very insightful and nice discussion. It was so much fun to see all of you finally on Zoom, and hope to see you all in person at some point very soon, given that we are going back to in-person conferences. And thanks so much to all the participants for joining us, attending this, and we'll now do the open participant Zoom session where all of you will become like the participants of the Zoom call, and you can just chime in, express your thoughts, comments about what we just discussed, and this will be an open discussion, okay? And will not be recorded or live streamed, right? Thank you so much.
Thanks for organizing. Thanks for hosting.
Yeah, thanks, Hima.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hima.